Using modern computers, we can emulate all kinds of old computers, including emulating the Amiga. In this case, you can see this is an Amiga 4040, and we are emulating an old Apple PC. Back in the day, this Apple stuff was cutting edge, but these days, even the resolution seems a bit retro. And you can see we can use the Apple software, but because it's in monochrome, I never appreciated most of the Apple games. It was a bit like the ZX Spectrum Commodore 64 argument. On the ZX you had the high resolution, you had the high monochrome graphics of the last Ninja 2, but on the Commodore 64, well, at least we had the colours. And being colourful is what I love about the Amiga. But not only can we emulate an Apple Mac and a PC on the Amiga from day one, from the launch party, we can also emulate a few other things as well. And most of the things I haven't managed to get to run on my setup. So you can see me fruitlessly trying to do something. It's not going to work. For some reason, I'm not set up for it. And so let's try something else then. And Master Gear is something that does work. This plays Master System games. And long-time followers of my show may remember that I played a few Master Gear games in a video in the past. Can't quite remember which one it was, but let's just boot up Sonic the Hedgehog anyway. And let's try to enjoy the Master Gear version of Sonic the Hedgehog. On this emulator, you can hear the music is playing very slowly, and the control of the character runs a few frames below par. And I'm not sure whether you can tweak Master Gear to tweak the frames per second, but you can see Sonic, the Sega Master System version, does work on the Amiga, absolutely no problem whatsoever. But for Amiga users, we always wanted the proper Sonic experience. And so let's quit that emulator and return back to Workbench again, because the final emulator of the four, one that I can actually get working, is called Amigen. And with Amigen, that's a CLI, command line user interface application. And CLI apps require us to type things in. So let's get into that directory and let's show you what's going on in this Amigen directory that I've created. And let's just make that a little bit bigger. You can see there's a few games in there, and there's the exe file and also the turbo exe file, which is hopefully the one that we'll be using to try and get running in this review guide and play around on these games. So let's try to get this to work. First of all, we'll need to obviously type in the name of the application that we want, and that's the T version. It almost looks like Ami Agent 68K version, T version, and by checking that out we can see a few of the, what I like to call tool types, or the flags, or whatever you like to call them these days. We don't really bother with DOS apps, but back in my day everything was DOS, so you had to use these switches. And so let's require latency cycle 1, and let's set the frame skip, in this case, to 1. And now let's set up the game that we want to play. In this case, let's type in Sonic the Hedgehog, because Sonic the Hedgehog, of course, is a benchmark. And I haven't really played this much on the Amiga. So let's type it in, remembering, of course, to close the punctuation marks, in this case, around the .smd. And that should mean, hopefully, that will give us a screen requester asking us what screen we want to add. So let's choose the normal one, the ordinary one, and let's see what happens now. and as you can see, it works. And to try and get this running, I've actually got a workbench icon, which you might have seen, which loads up a button menu, of which I'll show you now. So this is the script for the buttons I made, just to run all the different programs to save me typing them in. Because it's a command line interface, I created my own front ends using a program called Buttons. And so all of those configurations that I like to use are locked in. So all I need to do is to run Buttons, and that should, if we run this, it should have all of the choices already listed. You see Buttons, copyright 1999, and this is malware. And maybe he's moved address since he made this application. But let's check out the first one. We can have Sonic 1 running on keys or the Gamepad. So let's check it out on the Gamepad, and for this let's just use the standard resolution. We can even upscale graphics onto our Amiga. For many years there's obviously been a massive debate as to whether Sonic could run on the Amiga, and they gave all kinds of reasons why it wasn't possible. But as R.J. Michael once said, probably misquoted, there's nothing that you can do in hardware that you can't do in software. And what he meant by that was, there's nothing you can't program and make the computer do that you can do in hardware that you can't replicate in software. And so if you remember the Dizzy games, the Oliver twins used to create all of their Dizzy games on the Amstrad CPC and on the SNES, well the NES when that came along, and then what they used to do is emulate and port the game to all the other systems. So on the CPC we then got the ZX Spectrum port, and then the Commodore 64 port, and then the Amiga ports and the ST ports, and all of those games were ported from the originals. So if you look at this, this is actually running on an emulator running on an Amiga. Not only that, of course, but it's also a Sega Megadrive emulator running on an Amiga emulator running on a PC. And this is the first time I've ever seen or played these games, ever. So let's check out the second Sonic. Never actually played this game. Let's see what all the fuss is about. And you might hear that the music plays just a little bit slower on this one. You can see the backgrounds have lots of overlapping parallax, and that's actually identical to Kid Chaos, which had all those identical layers of parallax in the background, so it could be done. And the very far clouds that I think are going away in the background, yes they are scrolling away, that's not a very hard effect. This waterfall has been done in a million Amiga games, and because this is an emulator running on the Amiga, yes, it was possible to even emulate the entire thing. The emulator is not perfect. Let's move on to our next game, or rather the next introduction. This is like Crusader, and again I've never seen or played or even heard about this game before. Obviously if you had a Sega back in the day you might have heard of it. No idea whether it's a top game or a bottom ender, but you can see a guy smiling saying, "I shall have my revenge for what they have all done to me. I shall never forgive them," smiling away as he says it. So I'm not sure if this is supposed to be an RPG, and actually having recorded this already I can tell you that we won't actually get to see the game itself. And all this introduction stuff reminds me of Dune 2 on the Amiga. Well, all of this stuff may have been incredibly impressive, but to me it's incredibly boring, and these unskippable cutscenes are always incredibly boring in these games. So you can see, well, I won't point out many of the games that ripped off, but it's not quite Shadow of the Beast, it's more like Wrath of the Demon. Let's move on to our next game. This is Batman, and we'll remember the amazing Amiga game Batman, and also the Commodore 64 version, which was a version and not a port. So I've never seen this before. I've played the arcade version, but I've never actually seen this one on the Sega. Let's check it out. And yes, in this version it's a punch 'em out, and on the Sega it looks like all we have to do is to walk in one direction, not explore a massive maze. We have to punch everybody out, and they walk up to us in front of us and allow us to punch them out. And there's no rope swing going on at this stage, and you can see the emulator emulating an emulator on a PC, struggling to put the rain to the background. But apart from that, guys are lining up to get punched out, and this is easier than Mike Tyson's Punch Out. And at the end of the level, well, again, I've seen this before because I've pre-recorded it, but at the end of the level we're even given full health against the boss. So this isn't as fun, I would say, as the Amiga or the Commodore 64 version by a long way. And I'm glad I didn't get this version back in the day. This is a bit like Robocop, but without the bullets. We have a few batarangs, and you're supposed to save all those up, I guess, against the boss. And you can see the 2 health hearts. It actually gives us some health at the end, and this game is more like Mike Tyson's Punch Out. But I haven't played virtually any NES games in my entire life. Never any Sega games, apart from a few on the Sega Master System, and virtually none on the consoles. I'm definitely, when it comes to keyboards, a computer fan. So, well, wasn't that impressed by that, to be honest. So let's try a milestone in coding history. This is the Sega version of Outrun, and what we get is all the music and all the screens, and what we get is actually something amazing. Here before your very eyes is Outrun, playing like Outrun, looking like Outrun, sounding like Outrun on the Amiga, and we have a high frame rate. And we have good colours and not a cat-sick yellow road. We have forks in the road which doesn't really need any more loading. We have all of the windsurfers. We have all of the right colours in all of the correct order. So that means that we have what is missing from the Amiga version: fun in a bucket, and you can throw that bucket around on the Sega version. Was it impossible to code this on the Amiga? No, it was not, and even with the graphical bugs on this emulated version, you can see everything is in there, and the graphics on this 16-bit version are better than what we got on that Amiga. So let's check out something else. This is Ranger X, and as I keep saying, before I recorded this, I hadn't seen any of these before, but I remember a screenshot of this version, because apparently it's a bit like Turrican, where you can ride on something like a jet board, and you can blow things up with your own jet board, which you can ride on and even drive like a bike. I'm not quite sure. Let's check it out for the very first time, see how far we get. You can see what we can ride on, and I've no idea how to ride on it at this point, but it seems to be shooting with us, so let's let it shoot into those enemies. And you can see a few things in the background. I think someone's trying to blow up a city, and it's great effects, and you can see the bit planes on offer, but you can see that the Amiga is also emulating those bit planes, no problem, with an 040, and of course in an expanded A1200 could probably, if it was coded right, with the right optimized code, it could probably emulate this. Probably. On the Amiga, or should I say Sega, I'm not actually tackling this game without a problem, and this is a lot harder than it looks. Some of this reminds me of Silkworm, with the things trying to blow us up, and we also have the bike as well. It would be handy to know how to get on the bike. It's great with the great explosions, but what you might notice whilst we're playing these games is the audio for some reason is only coming out of the left speaker. Found what looks like health recharge points, so let's recharge that. We also have some weapon power as well, which is on minimum. I have no idea what we're supposed to be doing in this game, but I presume if we hold down the fire button, that button will then charge and deliver a mega shot into that enemy. A bit like R-Type, we have to probably power that thing up. Character and the flying around actually reminds me of something like Battle Station Aguila or whatever it was called on the PS2, I think it was, and there was two of those, and that was a really manic 3D fighter with one objective to blow every single thing up on the entire level by flying around it, and I forget the actual name of the game, but that was definitely something I remember on the PlayStation. It seems we've qualified onto some kind of bonus stage. We will seem to be walking on things, and can we pick this up to gain more power? Are we supposed to shoot it? I have no idea. But whatever it was, we're now through it, and we're down to the end of World 1 boss, which means I think we're supposed to shoot it on the hip. Well, that's that blowing up. Now shoot it on the back engine where it's flashing, and I would be amazing if I knew how to control this game, but I don't. So let's move on to the next one. This is Gravity Force 2. And if you remember the Gravity Force game, the conversions, if I can loosely term them that, on the Commodore 64 and on the Amiga, then you'll know that this is a relentlessly amazing game, played in the arcades, something that I never actually got to do in real life, in the 3D cabinet. But on all of the conversions known to mankind, it's rubbish, and this one isn't so much of an impressive conversion. It's more or less as bad as the others. 3D was definitely the future, and parts of this game actually reminds me of the Ace Combat series, where you can lock on to multiple targets and blow them all up, and also Res as well, again on the PlayStation. But apart from those reminders, this is early arcade history, and I guess back then there weren't too many of these power drift games which seem to line things up on the screen for us. It's not truly 3D, it's on rails, but this is also like Star Wars, which is also on rails. This kind of sprite multiplexing and a power drone relentless background wasn't so impressive, and even the likes of Trailblazer and the Commodore 64 had more impressive graphics and speed than this. Perhaps they should have used the Space Harrier engine. Perhaps I'm not even using the boost, which probably uses more power and boosts us through the level. I'm not quite sure. I'm probably crawling through it at minimum speed. But to be honest, this isn't the type of game that I'd enjoy playing on any computer because, well, I'm just no good at it. Let's move on to Earthworm Jim 2, and I couldn't get the original working, so let's move on to the sequel. And Earthworm Jim is a very easy game, and I managed to get very far with it when I did actually try that on a PC emulator, emulating the Sega. I've never actually seen Earthworm Jim 2 before, and so it should just be a matter of using our head to grip hold of things, using our gun to blow things up. And you can see things with helicopter heads remind me of Arabian Nights on the Amiga, and all these weird creatures. It's definitely fun to blow those up in the original game, but unfortunately I can't figure out what I'm supposed to do in the sequel. I'm pressing all the buttons just to see if I can jump out of this pit. I can't, so that's another wasted opportunity. Let's move on to our next game, a game that I've never even clapped eyes on before now. There is a story and there is a hero. Well, let's check this out. At this point, I'm beginning to wonder what all the fuss of Sega games is all about. This is a bad dudes versus dragon ninja type of game where we walk along the screen and punch everything out. And it's been done in Batman, it's been done in Robocop, it's been done in many games, but unlike Golden Axe, we can't seem to move about. All we can do is to walk about, high kick, and let the enemies wander into our punches. That's the exploration over. Now we return to similar looking walls and similar looking baddies and similar defeative tactics to get rid of them. I can't even remember the name of this because I missed it in the video, but whatever it is, I've seen better coming out of Altered Beast on the Amiga. If you like easy beat 'em ups, then Last Battle was the game for you, and I just noticed this one. This may seem familiar to a few people. And it's Echo the Dolphin. And in Echo the Dolphin, we play as a dolphin, and we can use our sonar to locate God knows whatever, because I've never played this game ever before. So when I have seen this game, I've still had no idea what I'm supposed to be doing. How can we stay beneath the waves so long without air? Well, you can't, because you're supposed to breathe it, and perhaps we're even supposed to breathe it in this game, and I guess that's supposed to be the air meter on the top. So, what are we supposed to be doing? I have no idea. Maybe the aim is to simply go through the teleport rings and teleport ourselves onto the next level. And that would be sensible. On the surface it seems like these graphics are great, but all they've done is make a tiled background, or at least a background that's bigger than the game area, and they've scrolled that in the background. And parts of this game remind me of, well, I was going to say nebulous, but this part is supposed to be a 3D section with a looping mock 3D section, and you can see it can even jump out of the water as well. And this looks like it's Space Harrier underwater. Maybe those are the rings that we're supposed to go through. I spectacularly missed that one, and maybe we're supposed to go through these rings in a bonus stage. And you can see that I can even scan things and blow things up. I'm not even sure because there's no score on the screen, and it's great visual effects, but this is not a 3D game in the strictest sense on this platform. Still no idea what I'm supposed to be doing here, if indeed this is a bonus stage. I've gone through one hoop, and we seem to have one block of health left. That means it's probably a good time to leave and check out GunStar Heroes, which is a name that I've heard before, never played the game, and so let's check this out and see what it's all about. Game, it's a bit like a Turrican game mixed in with colourful graphics, and this is a cartoony version of a destruct 'em up. You can see everything blows up on the screen, and it's, well, it would be sample stock and staple format for the Amiga, but it wasn't. It was the sample staple format of the consoles because they tended to do things in a cutesy way. This reminds me of maybe Assassin on drugs. It's definitely a shoot 'em up, and it's quite fun. That's GunStar Heroes. I guess that could have been an end of level boss, and I was supposed to collect this health, hopefully, and now we'll get to see some special effects as the entire screen rumbles in anticipation, obviously, of the boss. Also collect power-ups in this game, and that's also helpful because you can use those in different situations, and it's a game that I wish that we had got actually on the Amiga. And this is not hard to code. It's again very similar with a couple of bit planes, and the colours would have been very easy to replicate on an Amiga 1200. This is playing on an Amiga 4000 or 40 AJ, and that means that we have the colours available to play this game. Well, that's GunStar Heroes, and on the Amiga we had Midnight Resistance, where we had to run through levels and destroy things, and I think in this game, well, it's pretty similar, where we have to get to a checkpoint and then defeat a boss. The speed of the emulation isn't affected, and I really think that they have done a great job with this emulator, and it gives us a chance to play these games even on an Amiga that we never got to see back in the day. We get to see them played on the Amiga, and it's extra special to see them played on the Amiga rather than booting them up in a Sega Master System or a Mega Drive emulator on a PC, because that feels a bit like cheating. And if you're going to do that on the Amiga, it feels like future technology, which wasn't actually very possible back in the day. This is an amazing game, but it isn't as colourful or as technical as Rough and Tumble on the Amiga, and the levels aren't as huge either, and the weapon array at this rate is pretty similar with firepower and flamethrowers, and you can see bosses. Well, I've certainly seen huge bosses on the Amiga, and right now probably half of the comments will say, why do you keep comparing things to games that you've seen on the Amiga? Well, I've never actually played this game before, and so all I have for reference are Amiga games and 64 classics. At this point I'm trying the old Turrican 2 method of jumping on his head. It wasn't for having it. And you can see a space extra, which is definitely the opposite of a space intro. And so Herzog's Why. I think this was an arcade game, and I can't remember, but we'll certainly see. Is it a tank game? Well, let's check it out, let's find out. And looking like a very basic game at this point. And as it turns out, it's one of those games where we fly around a free-roaming landscape, which was done in quite a few Amiga games, and you get to turn into a human and an aeroplane and I think a tank as well. And so it's kind of a transforming movie, and that kind of transforming of course reminds me of a certain Amiga game where you got to do that. I'm thinking of Xenon, the original Xenon, and maybe this thing did take a few ideas from games. In fact, didn't we play a game pretty recently last year which used those types of ships going around a 3D landscape? I can't remember the name, but it's pretty similar, and pity the colour scheme on that game was a bit weedy, and so it looks like we've wandered into a Dirty Harry game. And here we must shoot people down. Unfortunately we don't have a mouse, we have a controller, and so things are much more difficult. But the trick, I guess, is to keep a plane in the centre of the action. Don't shoot any innocent people. The game is very tough, and I'm finding it very tough. Maybe you have to memorise all the spots, and when we get to the Take 'em Out review on the Amiga, well, we have a bigger play area and slightly more colours on the screen, but games like Take 'em Out and all the other shooters that we had a great feel. This is definitely a bridge between the PlayStation games that I've also played, and so let's also bridge the top-down driving games that I've also played. I've played Macro Machines on the Amiga. It's got many fans out there, so let's check out Macro Machines 2, played on the Sega, something that could have been ported to the Amiga without much trouble, because for my money it follows a very similar format to the original game. this sequel, maybe the frame rates are a bit juddery, maybe that's the bike that I'm driving. You can see the aim is to drive around the track, and all I had to do was to convert these tabletop graphics over to the Amiga and scroll them around, but they didn't, and that's why we didn't get Micro Machines 2, and perhaps they only wanted to deliver sequels on the consoles, because that's where most of the software houses were then diverting their money. We're on to stage 2, and that should mean that it becomes impossible if it's anything like Micro Machines 1, and yes, that would seem to be the case. So let's move on to our next game. This is Road Rash 2, and of course there was a debate whether Road Rash on Sega was better. And yes, it is, because it has more frames per second. That means it's smoother, and it has more clouds in the sky as well. It is definitely smoother, it is definitely a better engine, but we've seen Vroom on the Amiga really slap this kind of game into the ground. So they could have improved the engine and the Amiga version, but they didn't because they prioritised the silky graphics of a Sega game on a Sega machine. And this was Electronic Arts, who were big fans of Sega at the time. So maybe that's why we got an inferior port, but as we've seen on the Amiga, we have had a fast version of this on the Amiga as well. And so it wasn't all bad, but you can play those games on the emulator. So you can see the emulator struggling to center the screen. This is Rocket Knight Adventures, another game that I should know like the back of my hand. I have heard of it, never played it. Let's check it out. This definitely reminds me of many arcade games that had big graphics that you had to blow up, and this is modelled on arcade feel and quality, and some of the enjoyment out of the game is by mastering the controls. In this case I've just mastered the art of diving over things. Let's dive over this, and it also gives us a fast run through the level. It's not quite as technical as the Adventures of Lomax or those kinds of games that we did get on the Amiga, and it has a nice bright colour scheme as well, and it's quite jolly and quite fun to get into, and quite large sprites. But again, this isn't a 3D game. It's not like Golden Axe where you can avoid these things. You have to fight everything in this game. So I hope you've enjoyed me playing through these games that I've never even seen before. They are quite good. And let's move on to our last game, Toe Jam and Earl. Again, one of those games that everybody says is a classic, but unfortunately I never got anywhere with it when I tried it in this play guide. In fact, I never actually got off the map screen, which I think this is. So this has been my introduction to the Sega. It has a few faster frame rates on the driving games, but that does not necessarily mean it's amazing. And you can see that all the games that I could get to run are playable, and so you can have a fun time trying to get these to work on the Amiga. But I don't have a clue what I'm doing at the moment, so let's quit out of buttons, and that's my launcher that I created for the Amigen program on the Amiga.